amazing protests in 90 different cities in Russia have broken out. Now, we're told by pollsters in Russia, if you could believe that, and it's not that the pollsters are bad guys, but it's that a lot of people are afraid to answer the pollsters, that Putin is very popular in Russia. And by the way, I don't doubt that when he took over Crimea, that was a very popular move domestically. It was not popular internationally, but a lot of nationalism, et cetera. And for a while they were riding high on oil money. Now, because of the sanctions and lower oil prices, things are not going as well. So now, Putin, who was very popular and probably a little bit more or a little less popular than the polls indicated, all of a sudden not so popular, and how things have turned. So let's look at here some of the facts around those Russian protests. There were at least 700 arrests linked to the protests, including that of leading Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny, who was sentenced to 15 days in jail and fined. Oh God, I hope he's all right in jail. So now I'm going to tell you about the demonstrations, why they're happening, and why things have turned so quickly on Putin. Huffington Post explains, although the demonstrations were unexpectedly large, they had been planned for weeks, sparked by a viral investigative video that Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation released on March 2nd. The report alleged that Russia's Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev had accumulated vast real estate holdings through bribery and graft. And Medvedev, now the current Prime Minister, used to be the former president, but basically just a puppet of Putin, has done pretty much everything that Putin has asked of him. So now let's give you color on that corruption. We go to the BBC. Unlike other opposition challengers, when we're talking about Navalny now, his cause is not democracy. This is really interesting. So this is a guy opposing Putin, but his cause is not democracy, a dirty term for many here after the criminal 1990s, where a lot of corruption happened under the rubric, under the name of democracy, although that isn't, of course, real democracy. And his cause is also not a vague concept like human rights, BBC explains. It's very concrete, corruption. The real problem is corruption, and he's targeting it. And that is resonating in Russia, as you can tell. Now, NBC News explains what was in Navalny's report about Medvedev. His report alleged that one of Medvedev's estates featured a duck house built in the middle of a pond. It also painted the prime minister as compulsive online shopper, ordering 73 t-shirts and 20 pairs of sneakers in just 3 months. So that's why a lot of people brought rubber duckies and sneakers to the protests. Now, the report showed mansion on top of mansion, and the idea was that these Russian oligarchs would buy these mansions for Medvedev through a foundation set up by Medvedev's buddies. Yet another world leader setting up foundations to get goodies and staffing it with their buddies. So that was the trick. Now, protesters are, of course, irate about that because the Russian economy is now in significant trouble, and a lot of people are having trouble making a living. Meanwhile, you got this guy building houses for ducks, let alone the mansions that he owns, one of which is worth $85 million, according to the report. The demonstrators noted this alleged opulence by carrying ducks and sneakers during Sunday's marches. Some also painted their faces green in solidarity with Navalny after unidentified attackers threw green antiseptic at him last week. The substance takes days to wash off, and Navalny has been sporting a green face for some time. Man, let's pause here to, one, talk about how strong and brave those Russian protesters are. In an era of Putin, where God knows what could happen to people who oppose the Putin government, and a lot have been assassinated recently, and so have reporters covering it. For the reporters to cover it, obviously state-run television is totally in the tank for Putin. They almost didn't cover it at all, but newspapers did, for the protesters themselves, and then for Navalny to oppose this Putin government and then to go into jail. Let's hope he makes it out alive, but that is some significant, massive courage. Okay, now talking about how Navalny is right overall about corruption, Medvedev's case is one that has to be proven still, if he's ever charged. My guess is that Putin is not looking forward to charging his number 2 man. Anyway, Transparency International, a non-governmental organization that monitors corruption, ranks Russia 131st out of 176 countries on its corruption perception index. So there is massive, rampant corruption in the Russian government. Now back to the Huffington Post. Russian government agencies and officials have faced widespread corruption allegations in recent years. The Panama Papers leaks last year suggest that Russian President Vladimir Putin and his family were connected to offshore holdings and loans worth at least $2 billion through friends and intermediary companies. Now, that did not hurt his rankings back then because the Russian economy was improving. But now when people are having trouble getting a job and you're sitting on at least $2 billion according to just the Panama Papers, and your number two is running around ordering 7-3 shirts at a time, then people are going to start to get pissed. And that's the situation we're in today. Hence, the demonstrations on Sunday were notable for a number of reasons, including the seemingly large percentage of younger protesters and the willingness of participants to show up despite authorities' warnings that they lacked a permit. That is Russian for "we will beat you and arrest you." Okay, now back to the BBC. These were very young Russians who have grown up under Vladimir Putin on a diet of patriotism, but on Sunday they joined a crowd chanting, "Putin thief and Russia will be free." Wow. So guess why? Why is not all of them, but a lot of the protesters young? Because they're getting their news from social media. Navalny's report on Medvedev's corruption on YouTube got 13 million views. State TV is not covering it at all. The older generation is asleep, kind of like here in the US. The younger generation has the information and is justifiably angry about it and is doing something patriotic by protesting. Now, the liberal radio station Echo of Moscow estimated that 60,000 turned out across the country, with 10,000 apiece in Moscow and St. Petersburg alone. The bulk of the attendees were teens and people aged in their early 20s. Oh, I love the young. They get their news from social media, and yes, online, oftentimes not blocked by the state or by the government. You're going to get better information. I know everybody's worried about the epidemic of fake news, some of which was launched by the Russian government, but a lot of what the governments say either against each other or on behalf of themselves is fake to begin with. The Pentagon here in America claims they've never told a lie. And CNN and the rest of the mainstream media, of course, the Republicans say this, the Democrats say that, the Pentagon says this, the US government says that, never question. How often do you hear on CNN the Pentagon is lying? Over there in Russia, state television run by Putin. Oh, of course, what protests? I don't see any protests. Putin is once again correct, and he wrestled the bear the other day and he won. And he scored 13 goals in a hockey game. It might have been more. The hockey game is actually true. The idiot goes around like his old ass man shooting pucks like this, and the Russian national team stands aside and lets it go in the goal. And the Russian television is like, wonderful, he is better than even our top athletes. That's the crap that's on TV. That's why the young aren't buying it, whether it's in Russia or the US. They're actually seeing the reality online. So now the reality is officers used tear gas and physically beat protesters, including women and younger teenagers. Pictures also showed some of the demonstrators being dragged away across asphalt, but they came out anyway. Back to Huffington Post, the Kremlin has tried to downplay the rallies by claiming that some protesters were paid to attend, while state-run government television has barely covered them. Okay, now despite the fact that television continues to lie about the protests in Russia, Alexei Navalny says anyway, quote, "There are millions of us and we're not going anywhere." Now that right there is a brave Russian patriot that cares about the country, at least in regards to this investigation, and bringing real transparency to corruption. Some in Russia, certainly in the Russian government, and certainly in Russian television, care a lot more about their own gain and their pocketbooks. There are a lot of people in Russia who believe in resistance and who believe that there can be a better Russia free of corruption. Podcast The Young Turks anytime you want. tytnetwork.com/join.
I think it's weird.
No, it's not weird. In fact, you'll think,
I'm like a smart person.
Do it now. tytnetwork.com/join.